The Florida heat hit Colonel Diana Hayes like a physical wall as she stepped off the plane at Southwest Florida International Airport. 40 years of military precision had taught her to travel light. But the single duffel bag slung over her shoulder felt heavier than any combat gear she'd ever carried. Inside her jacket pocket, her father's silver compass pressed against her chest, a talisman she'd carried through 4 decades of service. Through battles in places whose names couldn't be spoken. Through the kind of darkness that carved lines into a person's soul. She hadn't told Michael she was coming. The decision had been sudden. Born from a restlessness that retirement couldn't cure. 3 months of civilian life had stretched before her like an empty highway. Filled with nothing but the echo of orders never given. Missions never planned. At 60, she was young enough to start over. Old enough to know that starting over required courage she wasn't sure she possessed anymore. The taxi driver loaded her bag without conversation. Barely glancing at the woman whose posture still screamed military despite the civilian clothes. Naples, she told him, giving Michael's address in the quiet neighborhood he'd moved to after his promotion to senior architect. As the cab pulled onto the highway, palm trees swayed in the humid afternoon air, and Diana tried to ignore the tightness in her chest. They hadn't spoken much lately. Work had consumed them both, her final deployment in Afghanistan. His latest project designing a community center for underprivileged kids. Their last video call, scheduled for his birthday 3 weeks ago, had been cancelled. An emergency briefing, she'd told him. He'd laughed it off with the easy grace that reminded her so much of his father. "We'll catch up when you get back. Mom, I've got some news to share anyway." She'd been meaning to ask about that news. Michael had sounded different during their brief calls, tired. Perhaps, but also excited about something. At 38, her son had built a life she admired from a distance, a successful career. A beautiful home, and a marriage to Victoria that seemed solid despite its relative newness. They'd been married only 18 months. But Michael spoke of his wife with the kind of reverence Diana had never expected to hear from her pragmatic son. The cab turned onto Magnolia Street, and something in Diana's chest shifted. The well-maintained homes with their neat lawns and trimmed hedges looked peaceful in the late afternoon light. Children's bicycles dotted driveways. A woman watered her garden while her dog dozed in the shade. But Michael's house stood out immediately. And not in a good way. The grass had grown wild, nearly hiding the stone path to the front door. The mailbox overflowed with envelopes that had spilled onto the ground. All the curtains were drawn tight against the windows. And the cheerful yellow paint Michael had chosen when he bought the place now seemed faded. Neglected. It didn't look like a home where people lived. It looked abandoned. Diana paid the driver and stood on the sidewalk, her trained eyes cataloging details that felt wrong. The newspaper in the driveway was yellowed with age. A package sat by the front door, warped from multiple rainstorms. The silence from within the house was complete. No music. No television. No sounds of life. She was reaching for her phone to call Michael when a voice called from across the street. "Excuse me, are you looking for the Hayes family?" Diana turned to see an elderly woman approaching from the house across the street. She was small and bird-like, with silver hair pulled back in a neat bun and gardening gloves still on her hands. Her expression was cautious but kind. "I'm Diana Hayes," she replied, something cold settling in her stomach. "Michael's mother." The woman's face went pale. She stopped walking, her gardening gloves twisting in her hands. "Oh, dear. Oh, my dear. You don't know, do you?" The question hung in the humid air like a physical presence. Diana felt her military training kick in, the hyper-awareness. The preparation for bad news that came with decades of experience in delivering and receiving it. "Know what?" Her voice remained steady, but her fingers found the compass in her pocket. "I'm Margaret Patterson. I live right there." The woman pointed to a tidy house with rose bushes lining the walkway. "I've been watching Michael's house since they took him away." "Took him where?" Mrs. Patterson glanced back at Michael's house, then lowered her voice even though no one else was around. "The hospital, dear. 3 weeks ago. The ambulance came in the middle of the night. I heard the sirens, saw the lights." The words seemed to come from very far away. Diana found herself thinking about the cancelled birthday call, about Michael's absence from their scheduled conversations. about the excitement in his voice when he'd mentioned having news to share. "Which hospital?" she managed. "Naples General. But honey," Mrs. Patterson's voice trailed off. And she looked away. "I'm so sorry. Michael passed away 2 weeks ago." The world tilted slightly. Diana had received death notifications before, had delivered them herself to families whose children had fallen in service to their country. She knew the protocol, the careful words, the necessary distance required to survive such moments. But this was different. This was her child. How? The single word came out steady. Controlled. Cancer. It was very sudden, they said. He'd been sick for months. But he kept it quiet. Didn't want people to worry. Mrs. Patterson's eyes filled with tears. "He was such a good man. Your son. Always helped carry my groceries. Always asked about my grandchildren." Diana nodded, filing away the information while her mind raced ahead to practical matters. It was a survival mechanism, focus on the immediate tasks. Deal with the emotions later. And Victoria? His wife? Mrs. Patterson's expression shifted, something uncomfortable flickering across her features. "That's the strange thing, dear. She disappeared the same day Michael was admitted to the hospital. Haven't seen her since." Disappeared? Left in the middle of the night with suitcases. "I saw her loading her car around 2 a.m., thought it was odd. But people have emergencies." She hesitated, but then she never came back. Not even for the funeral. The funeral. Diana's son had been buried. And she hadn't even known he was sick. There was a little girl. Mrs. Patterson continued, her voice growing softer. "Emma, Victoria's daughter from a previous relationship. 8 years old. Sweet as pie. She's been staying with the Clearwater family down the street since Victoria left. Child services got involved, of course. A child. Michael had never mentioned a child." Diana thanked Mrs. Patterson and walked slowly toward Michael's house, each step feeling like a movement through deep water. She had a key. Michael had given it to her when he bought the place, insisting she should have access in case of emergencies. The irony wasn't lost on her now. The front door opened with a soft click, and stale air rushed out to meet her. The house felt like a tomb, airless, silent, heavy with the weight of abandonment. Diana stepped inside and immediately noticed the absence of family photos, the missing personal items that would normally mark a home as lived in and loved. In the living room, empty picture frames sat on the mantelpiece, their contents removed. A thin layer of dust covered the surfaces. A half-empty coffee cup sat on the kitchen counter, a ring of mold growing around the edges. But it was the kitchen table that stopped her cold. Spread across its surface were medical documents, insurance papers, and what appeared to be financial records. Diana approached slowly, her trained eye taking in the organized chaos. Someone had been going through Michael's papers systematically. She picked up a medical report dated 6 weeks earlier. Pancreatic cancer. Stage 4. Metastatic. The clinical language couldn't disguise the death sentence contained within those pages. Her son had been dying, and she hadn't known. Beneath the medical papers, she found bank statements. The numbers made her stomach clench. Michael's accounts, which had shown healthy balances in the statements from 6 months ago, were nearly empty. Massive withdrawals had been made in the weeks leading up to his hospitalization, cash advances, wire transfers, checks written to cash in amounts that suggested someone had been systematically draining his resources. Diana sank into one of the kitchen chairs, the weight of discovery pressing down on her shoulders. Her son had been dying and someone, presumably Victoria, had been stealing from him while he fought for his life. A knock at the front door interrupted her investigation. Through the window, she could see a police officer standing on the porch, his hand resting casually on his radio. "Ma'am? I'm Officer Rodriguez with the Naples PD. Mrs. Patterson called and said there might be someone in the Hayes house." Diana opened the door, her military bearing automatically straightening her posture. "I'm Colonel Diana Hayes, retired. Michael was my son." Officer Rodriguez's expression softened immediately. "I'm sorry for your loss. Ma'am, we've been keeping an eye on the house since Mrs. Hayes disappeared. There have been some concerns about potential fraud." "What kind of concerns? Maybe we should sit down." Rodriguez glanced past her into the house. "There's quite a bit you need to know." For the next hour, Diana learned about the investigation that had been quietly building around Victoria Hayes, or rather, around the woman who had been using that name. Her real name was Sarah Chen, and she had a history of targeting vulnerable individuals, particularly those with significant assets and health problems. She's done this before, Rodriguez explained, spreading photographs across Michael's kitchen table. Different names, different cities, but the same pattern. She identifies lonely, wealthy individuals, particularly those dealing with illness, establishes relationships, gains access to their finances, and then disappears when they die. Diana studied the photographs, surveillance images of a woman with dark hair and sharp features. Pictures from what appeared to be other weddings, other lives. How many times? That we know of? At least 4, possibly more. The FBI has been tracking her for 2 years. And the child? Emma? Rodriguez's expression grew complicated. That's where things get more complex. Emma isn't Victoria's biological daughter. She was taken from a previous victim, a widower in Jacksonville who died under suspicious circumstances 2 years ago. The child's been through significant trauma. The revelation hit Diana like a physical blow. Not only had this woman stolen from her dying son, but she had also used a kidnapped child as part of her cover story. Where is Emma now? Temporary foster care with the Clearwater family. They're good people, but the situation is complicated. Emma hasn't spoken since Victoria disappeared. The trauma specialists think she may have witnessed something that night. Diana felt something cold and sharp settle in her chest, not grief. Not yet, but a familiar sense of mission focus. She had spent 4 decades protecting innocent people from predators. The fact that this predator had targeted her own family only sharpened her resolve. I want to see Emma. Rodriguez hesitated. Ma'am, with respect, the child doesn't know you. She's been through enough trauma. She's the only connection I have left to my son's final months. Diana's voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. And if she witnessed something, she might be the key to finding Victoria. Sarah, Rodriguez corrected. Her real name is Sarah Chen. Sarah Chen. Diana repeated the name, committing it to memory along with the face in the photographs. I want to know everything about her. Her history, her methods, her associates, everything. Colonel, I understand your desire for justice. But this is an active FBI investigation. There are protocols. Officer Rodriguez. Diana's voice dropped to the tone she'd used during briefings, when lives hung in the balance and there was no room for confusion. My son died alone while a predator stole everything he worked for. A traumatized child is the only witness to what may have been his final hours. I've spent 40 years hunting down people who prey on the innocent. You can work with me, or you can try to work around me, but you cannot stop me. Rodriguez studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. The Clearwater family lives 3 houses down. Blue shutters, swing on the front porch. But Colonel, go easy. That little girl has been through hell. Diana found the house easily enough, a cheerful home with children's toys scattered across the front yard and the sound of laughter drifting from the backyard. She knocked softly, and the door was opened by a woman in her 40s with kind eyes and flour-dusted hands. Mrs. Clearwater? I'm Diana Hayes. Michael Hayes was my son. The woman's expression immediately shifted to one of sympathy and understanding. Oh, you poor thing. Please, come in. I'm Susan Clearwater. We've been wondering when family would arrive. The house smelled like cookies and felt warm despite the Florida heat. Susan led Diana through a living room filled with the comfortable chaos of family life, books scattered on tables. A puzzle half completed on the coffee table. School papers held to the refrigerator with cheerful magnets. Emma's in the garden, Susan explained, pausing at the back door. Fair warning, she hasn't spoken since that night. The doctors say it's selective mutism, probably triggered by trauma. She communicates with gestures and drawings, but no words. Through the window, Diana could see a small figure sitting beneath a large oak tree. The child was perhaps 8 years old, with long dark hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. She sat very still, staring at something in her hands. What happened the night Sarah, disappeared? Susan's expression grew troubled. Emma called 911 from Michael's house around 3 a.m. She couldn't speak, but she managed to give the address. When the police arrived, They found Michael unconscious on the bedroom floor. Sarah was gone, along with several suitcases and most of the valuable items from the house. And Emma? She was hiding in the closet. Had been there for hours. They think. Whatever she saw that night. Susan shook her head. It broke something inside her. Diana watched the child through the window, noting the rigid way she held herself. The constant scanning of her environment that spoke of hypervigilance. She'd seen the same posture in soldiers returning from combat zones. I'd like to meet her. Susan hesitated. She's been very resistant to new people. The trauma team says not to push. I won't push. Diana's voice was gentle. I just want her to know she's not alone. They walked out into the garden together. And Diana was struck by how small Emma looked beneath the massive tree. The child glanced up as they approached. And Diana felt her breath catch. Emma had Michael's eyes, the same warm brown. The same intelligent alertness. But where Michael's eyes had always held laughter, Emma's held a wariness that no 8-year-old should possess. Emma, sweetheart, Susan said softly. This is Diana. She was Michael's mother. Emma studied Diana with the careful attention of someone much older, taking in details and filing them away. She didn't speak, but she didn't run either. Diana lowered herself to the ground, sitting cross-legged on the grass a few feet away from Emma. Close enough to communicate, far enough to avoid feeling threatening. Hello, Emma. Her voice was calm, steady. I'm sorry we haven't met before. I was far away, working. Emma continued to stare, and Diana could see her processing the information. After a moment, the child held up what she'd been clutching in her hands, a small wooden bird. Carved with intricate detail. That's beautiful, Diana said, genuinely admiring the craftsmanship. Did Michael make that for you? Emma nodded, then carefully placed the bird in the grass between them. She pulled out a piece of paper and a crayon from her pocket and began to draw. Diana waited patiently while Emma worked, understanding instinctively that rushing would undo any progress. Susan stood quietly nearby, ready to intervene if necessary but giving them space to connect. When Emma finished drawing, she turned the paper around. It was a simple but clear picture of a house, Michael's house, with 2 stick figures standing in front of it. One was larger, clearly an adult. The other was small, with long dark hair. Is that you and Michael? Diana asked gently. Emma nodded, then picked up the crayon again. This time, she drew a third figure. But this one was separate from the house. Standing far away, she drew an X over this figure. Then looked up at Diana with eyes that held too much knowledge for someone so young. The bad lady? Diana asked. Emma nodded vigorously, then pointed to herself and made a gesture with her hands, covering her eyes. Then pointing to the drawing. You saw what happened. Another nod, but this time Emma's hands were shaking slightly. She picked up the wooden bird and clutched it to her chest. Diana felt something fierce and protective rise in her chest. This child had witnessed something terrible, and then been abandoned by the very person who should have protected her. But underneath the trauma, Diana could see resilience, the same quality that had made Michael strong. The same determination that had carried Diana through decades of service. Emma, she said quietly, I want you to know something. I'm going to find out what happened to Michael. And I'm going to make sure you're safe. That's a promise. Emma stared at her for a long moment, then slowly reached out and placed the wooden bird in Diana's palm. Her small hand lingered for just a moment, warm and trusting, before she pulled it back. It was the first gesture of trust Diana had received in this new, complicated world she'd stepped into. As she looked down at the carved bird, a mockingbird, she realized, with its wings spread as if in flight, she felt the familiar weight of responsibility settle on her shoulders. But this time, it felt different. This wasn't about following orders or completing missions assigned by superior officers. This was personal. This was about justice for her son and protection for a child who had already endured too much. That evening, back in Michael's empty house, Diana spread the financial documents across the kitchen table and began her investigation in earnest. She'd faced enemy intelligence operations before, tracked down terrorists hiding in civilian populations, unraveled complex webs of deception and betrayal. The skills were transferable. Sarah Chen had been methodical in her theft, but she'd also been arrogant. The paper trail was extensive: wire transfers to accounts in the Cayman Islands, cash withdrawals that exceeded normal banking protocols, forged documents that granted her access to Michael's investment accounts. But it was the medical records that made Diana's hands shake with suppressed rage. Michael's cancer had been aggressive, but treatable if caught early. The first doctor's appointment was dated 8 months ago, early enough for intervention, for treatment that might have saved his life. But there was a gap in the medical records. A 2-month period where no treatments were documented, no appointments kept. Diana found the explanation in a folder tucked behind the financial papers. Insurance claim denials, all dated from that crucial 2-month period. Someone had been calling the insurance company, claiming to be Michael's wife, and canceling his coverage for financial reasons. The signatures on the cancellation forms weren't Michael's. They belonged to Victoria Hayes, Sarah Chen. She had deliberately delayed Michael's treatment, ensuring that by the time he received proper care, the cancer had progressed beyond hope. She had murdered him slowly, methodically, while systematically draining his accounts and preparing her exit strategy. Diana's phone rang, interrupting her grim discovery. Officer Rodriguez's name appeared on the screen. "Colonel Hayes? We've had a development. Emma drew something for her counselor today. I think you need to see it." 20 minutes later, Diana stood in the Clearwater's living room, looking down at a child's drawing that made her blood run cold. It showed Michael's bedroom, rendered in the simple but clear style of a young artist. On the bed lay a figure that was obviously sick, stick-thin arms, a face drawn with obvious distress. Beside the bed stood a woman with dark hair, holding what appeared to be a syringe. At the bottom of the page, Emma had written a single word in careful block letters: shot. The counselor thinks Emma saw Sarah giving Michael an injection of some kind. Rodriguez explained. Could have been medicine, could have been something else. We'll never know for sure without an autopsy. And Michael was cremated. Diana stared at the drawing, understanding finally why Emma had stopped speaking. The child had watched her stepfather being murdered and been powerless to stop it. There's something else, Rodriguez continued. The FBI tracked down Sarah's location. She's in Miami, living under another assumed identity. They're moving in tomorrow morning. I want to be there. Colonel, this is a federal operation. Emma is my responsibility now. Diana's voice brooked no argument. And I have 40 years of experience in operations like this. I'm not asking permission, Officer Rodriguez. I'm informing you of my intentions. Rodriguez studied her for a moment, then nodded. I'll make some calls. As Diana drove back to Michael's house that night, she found herself thinking about the wooden bird Emma had given her. Mockingbirds were known for their ability to mimic other sounds, to adapt and survive in changing environments. But they were also fiercely protective of their young, willing to fight much larger predators to defend their nests. Tomorrow, she would help federal agents arrest the woman who had murdered her son. But tonight, she had other preparations to make. She had a child to protect, a legacy to preserve, and a promise to keep. The weight of truth was heavy. But Diana Hayes had carried heavier burdens. And this time, she wasn't carrying them alone. Dawn broke gray and humid over Miami as Diana Hayes adjusted the earpiece that connected her to the FBI tactical team. She stood in the back of an unmarked surveillance van, studying photographs and intelligence reports while Agent Sarah Martinez briefed the team for the final time. The subject is currently using the identity Rebecca Williams, Martinez explained, pointing to surveillance photos taken outside a luxury high-rise in Coral Gables. She's been living there for 3 weeks, apparently funded by the money stolen from Michael Hayes and her previous victims. Diana stared at the photographs, memorizing every detail of the woman who had destroyed her son's life. Sarah Chen was beautiful in a calculated way, the kind of beauty that could open doors and disarm suspicions. She looked nothing like the grieving widow who should have been planning a funeral instead of living in luxury. What's the plan? Diana asked, her voice steady despite the rage burning in her chest. Standard arrest operation. We have warrants for fraud, identity theft, and suspected homicide. 2 teams, one takes the building entrance, one covers the garage. Clean and simple. She won't run, Diana said quietly. She's too arrogant. She thinks she's untouchable. Agent Martinez raised an eyebrow. What makes you so sure? 40 years of hunting predators. Diana's tone was matter of fact. They all have the same weakness: they underestimate their victims' families. At 6 a.m., the teams moved into position. Diana remained in the surveillance van, watching through multiple camera feeds as agents approached the building. She'd wanted to be part of the arrest team, but Martinez had been firm. She was an observer only, present as a courtesy to the victim's family. Diana understood the protocol, but that didn't make waiting any easier. "Target is moving," came the voice through her earpiece. "She's in the lobby, heading for the elevator." On the screen, Diana watched Sarah Chen walk casually through the marble lobby of the expensive building. She wore designer clothes and carried herself with the confidence of someone who had never faced consequences for her actions. Teams in position, moving in. Diana held her breath as she watched federal agents emerge from concealment, surrounding Sarah before she could reach the elevator. Even through the grainy surveillance footage, Diana could see the moment when Sarah realized her carefully constructed world was collapsing. But instead of surrender, Sarah did something unexpected. She smiled. "We have her in custody." Martinez's voice crackled through the radio. "But there's a problem. She's asking to speak with Diana Hayes specifically." Diana felt ice settle in her stomach. "She knows I'm here?" "Apparently. She says she has information about Emma that we need to hear." 20 minutes later, Diana sat across from Sarah Chen in a sterile interrogation room at the Miami FBI field office. Up close, Sarah was smaller than she'd appeared in the photographs, but her eyes held a calculation that reminded Diana of insurgents she'd interrogated in Afghanistan, people who viewed other human beings as tools to be used and discarded. "You're older than I expected," Sarah said conversationally, as if they were meeting for coffee rather than in the aftermath of her arrest. "Michael talked about you constantly. His war hero mother. He was so proud." Diana kept her expression neutral, though Sarah's casual use of her son's name made her want to reach across the table and shake the truth out of her. "Agent Martinez says you have information about Emma." Sarah laughed, a sound that held no warmth. "Straight to business. I can see where Michael got his directness." She leaned back in her chair, studying Diana with obvious interest. "You want to know what really happened that night, don't you?" "I know what happened. You murdered my son and traumatized a child." "Murder is such a strong word." Sarah's tone remained conversational. "I prefer to think of it as accelerating the inevitable. Michael was dying anyway. The cancer would have killed him within months. I simply helped him along while ensuring his assets didn't disappear into medical bills and false hope." The casual admission should have shocked Diana, but she'd heard similar rationalizations from enemy combatants trying to justify atrocities. "And Emma? How do you justify traumatizing an 8-year-old? For the first time, something flickered across Sarah's face, an emotion Diana couldn't quite identify. Emma wasn't supposed to see anything. She was supposed to be asleep. But she wasn't. No. Sarah's composure cracked slightly. "She was hiding in the closet, watching through the crack in the door. She saw me give Michael the injection. Saw him react." Diana's hands clenched into fists beneath the table. "What was in the syringe?" "Insulin. A massive dose. For someone with Michael's blood sugar levels. It was essentially a heart attack in a needle." Sarah's voice had grown quieter, almost contemplative. "He went into shock very quickly. There wasn't much pain. And Emma watched all of this." "Emma watched all of this," Sarah confirmed, and then she started screaming. The words hung in the air between them. Diana could picture it, her son dying on the bedroom floor while a terrified child screamed for help that wouldn't come in time. "Why are you telling me this?" Sarah was quiet for a long moment, staring at her hands. When she looked up, Diana saw something unexpected in her eyes: exhaustion. "Because I'm tired," Sarah said simply. "Tired of running. Tired of pretending. Tired of carrying this weight. And because Emma deserves better than what I gave her." "Emma isn't your daughter." "No, she isn't." Sarah's voice grew softer. "Her real name is Emma Rodriguez. Her father was my second husband, Antonio Rodriguez, a contractor in Jacksonville. He died in what the police called a construction accident." Diana felt puzzle pieces clicking into place. "You killed him too." Antonio was different from the others. He actually loved Emma, loved me. For a while, I thought maybe. She shook her head. But old habits die hard. When he started asking questions about money I'd been moving around. When he threatened to go to the police. You murdered him and took his daughter. I told Emma that her father had died in an accident. That I was all she had left. She was 6 years old. Traumatized. Completely dependent on me. It was easy to control her. Sarah's voice held no emotion. As if she were discussing the weather. I used her as part of my cover story. Single mother. Recently widowed. Struggling to make ends meet. Men find that combination irresistible. Diana's military training had exposed her to human evil in many forms. But the casual way Sarah discussed manipulating a grieving child was particularly chilling. And with Michael? Michael was perfect. Successful. Lonely. Generous to a fault. His military family background made him naturally protective. Especially once he believed Emma was in danger from her abusive father. Sarah actually smiled at the memory. He proposed within 6 months. Insisted on adopting Emma legally. Made it very easy to access his accounts. When did you decide to kill him? When the cancer diagnosis came back. Sarah's matter-of-fact tone never wavered. Stage 4 pancreatic cancer. Even with treatment, he had maybe a year. It was simply more efficient to speed up the timeline. Diana had heard enough confessions to recognize when someone was telling the truth. No matter how horrific that truth might be. Sarah Chen wasn't lying, she was confessing. Unburdening herself of secrets that had apparently grown too heavy to carry. There's something else, Sarah continued. Something about Emma that you need to know. What? She's not just traumatized by what she saw that night. She's been traumatized for 2 years. Since her father died, I haven't been kind to her. When she disappointed me, when she asked too many questions about her father, when she didn't play her part convincingly enough. Sarah's voice trailed off, but Diana could fill in the blanks. The hypervigilance she'd observed in Emma. The way the child scanned constantly for threats. The selective mutism. These weren't just reactions to witnessing Michael's murder. They were the accumulated effects of 2 years of psychological abuse. You tortured that child. I controlled her. Sarah corrected. Kept her quiet. Kept her compliant. It was necessary for the operation to work. Diana felt something cold and deadly settle in her chest. She'd faced enemy combatants who had committed atrocities. But they'd at least been fighting for some twisted ideology. Sarah Chen had tortured a child for nothing more than convenience and profit. Why are you telling me this? Diana asked again. Sarah was quiet for so long that Diana thought she might not answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely audible. Because 22 years ago, someone did the same thing to me. The words hit Diana like a physical blow. What? My real name isn't Sarah Chen. It's Sarah Patterson. I was 16 when my mother married Thomas Chen, a wealthy businessman in Seattle. He seemed wonderful at first, charming, generous, protective. But after the wedding, things changed. Diana felt a chill of recognition. The surname Patterson was familiar, but she couldn't place where she'd heard it. Thomas had a very specific way of controlling people. Sarah continued. Emotional manipulation, financial dependence, psychological conditioning. He turned my mother against me. Convinced her I was lying when I tried to tell her what he was doing. By the time I was 18, I was completely under his control. What happened to him? Sarah's smile was sharp and cold. Car accident. Brake failure on a mountain road in Colorado. Very tragic. Also very convenient, considering he'd just changed his will to leave everything to his beloved stepdaughter. The pieces were falling into place now, creating a picture that made Diana's stomach clench. You learned from him, his methods, his techniques. He was an excellent teacher, Sarah said with bitter irony. By the time he died, I knew exactly how to identify vulnerable targets, how to establish emotional dependency, how to extract maximum value with minimum risk. I simply applied those lessons to a broader market. And Emma? Emma is what I was at 6 years old, a victim. A tool. A prop in someone else's game. Sarah's composure finally cracked completely. And Diana saw genuine anguish in her eyes. The difference is, no one ever came to save me. Diana stared across the table at this woman who had murdered her son. Who had terrorized an innocent child. who had built a career on the destruction of families. But underneath the monster, she could see the ghost of another victim, a 16-year-old girl who had been broken and remade into something twisted and dangerous. "You could have stopped," Diana said quietly. "You could have gotten help. Gotten therapy. Found another way." "Could I?" Sarah's laugh was hollow. "You don't understand what it's like to be remade that completely. Every relationship, every interaction, every decision, it's all filtered through the survival mechanisms he taught me. I don't know how to love someone without destroying them. I don't know how to trust without being betrayed. I don't know how to exist without causing pain." "That's not an excuse." "No," Sarah agreed. "It's not. It's just an explanation." Diana stood up, signaling that the conversation was over. She'd gotten what she came for, the truth about Michael's death. Information about Emma's background, and a confession that would ensure Sarah Chen never hurt anyone else. But she'd also gotten something she hadn't expected, a glimpse into the complicated psychology of predation. The way victims could become victimizers. The cycle of trauma that could span generations. "What will happen to Emma now?" Sarah asked as Diana reached for the door. Diana turned back, studying the woman who had caused so much pain yet carried so much of her own. "She'll be safe. She'll be loved. She'll have the chance to heal, something you never had. And something I never gave her," Sarah said quietly. "I know I don't have the right to ask this. But, tell her I'm sorry. Tell her that what happened to her father wasn't her fault. Tell her that the way I treated her wasn't because she was bad or wrong or broken." Diana paused with her hand on the doorknob. "Tell her yourself. Write her a letter. She's smart enough to understand. When she's ready." "You think she'll ever forgive me?" "I think," Diana said carefully, "that forgiveness is something she'll have to decide for herself. When she's old enough to understand what forgiveness means." As Diana left the interrogation room, she found Agent Martinez waiting in the hallway with a thick file folder. "We've been building this case for 2 years," Martinez explained as they walked toward the elevator. "Sarah Chen, or Sarah Patterson, as we now know, is connected to at least 7 suspicious deaths across 4 states. Your son was just the most recent. What happens now?" "She'll be charged with multiple counts of murder, fraud, and child endangerment. With her confession and the evidence we've gathered, she's looking at life without parole. Possibly death penalty in some jurisdictions." Diana nodded, feeling no satisfaction in the prospect of Sarah's punishment. Justice was necessary, but it wouldn't bring Michael back or erase Emma's trauma. What about Emma's legal status? That's complicated. Technically, she's still in the foster care system. Her biological father is dead. And Sarah never legally adopted her despite what she told people. She's essentially an orphan. "I want to adopt her." Martinez stopped walking and turned to study Diana. "Colonel. Retry. JN. Continue. Edit. Colonel. With all due respect, that's a significant decision. Emma has been through severe trauma. She'll need specialized care, therapy, possibly years of treatment. And you're dealing with your own grief over your son's death." Diana met Martinez's gaze steadily. "Agent Martinez, I've spent 40 years protecting innocent people from predators. I've seen what happens when traumatized children don't have stable support systems. Emma needs someone who understands both military discipline and the effects of psychological warfare, because that's what she's been subjected to. It's not that simple. There are protocols, evaluations, home studies. Then let's start the process." Diana's tone brooked no argument. "I'm not walking away from that child. She's the last connection I have to my son. And more importantly, she's a little girl who needs someone to fight for her." Martinez studied Diana for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "I'll make some calls. But Colonel, this isn't a battlefield. Emma's healing can't be approached like a military operation." "No," Diana agreed. "It can't. But it can be approached with the same level of commitment and the same refusal to accept defeat." The drive back to Naples felt different than the journey to Miami. Diana carried with her not just the satisfaction of Sarah's arrest, but also the weight of new knowledge about Emma's past and the responsibility she was preparing to accept. She stopped first at the Clearwater house to see Emma. Susan greeted her at the door with a mixture of relief and concern. "How did it go?" Susan asked as they walked toward the backyard where Emma was sitting in her usual spot under the oak tree. Sarah's been arrested. She confessed to Michael's murder and to other things involving Emma. Susan's expression grew troubled. Other things? Diana explained what she'd learned about Emma's true identity, her father's death, and the 2 years of psychological manipulation she'd endured. Susan listened with growing horror, glancing frequently toward the child who sat so still and watchful in the garden. My God, that poor baby. No wonder she won't speak. There's something else, Diana said. I want to adopt Emma. I know it's sudden, and I know there are procedures. Diana. Susan's voice was gentle but firm. I think that's wonderful. I really do. But Emma has been through so much trauma. She's going to need time, patience, specialized care. Are you prepared for that? Diana looked out at Emma, who was holding the wooden mockingbird and staring at something only she could see. Susan, I've spent my entire adult life preparing for difficult missions. This is the most important one I'll ever undertake. They walked out to the garden together, and Emma looked up as they approached. Her eyes went immediately to Diana's face, searching for something: information, reassurance, threat assessment. Diana sat down on the grass, maintaining the respectful distance she'd established during their first meeting. Hello, Emma. I have some news about the bad lady. Emma's attention sharpened, her small body tensing with alertness. She's been arrested. She can't hurt you anymore. She can't hurt anyone anymore. Emma stared at Diana for a long moment, then carefully placed the wooden bird on the ground between them. She pulled out her ever-present paper and crayons and began to draw. This time, the picture showed a figure behind bars, clearly meant to represent Sarah. Next to it, Emma drew the same house from her previous picture. But this time there were 2 figures standing in front of it, the small one with long dark hair, and a new figure, taller and stronger looking. When she finished, Emma looked up at Diana with a question in her eyes. Yes, Diana said quietly. If you want, you can come live with me. In Michael's house, which would become our house. You'd have your own room, your own space, and all the time you need to feel safe again. Emma studied Diana's face with the intense scrutiny of someone who had learned the hard way that adults couldn't always be trusted. After what felt like an eternity, she picked up her crayon and added one more detail to her drawing: a small bird perched on the roof of the house. Then she carefully tore the paper in half, keeping the side with the house and the 2 figures, and pushing the side with the jail bars toward Diana. The message was clear: the bad part stays with you. The good part comes with me. Diana accepted the drawing, understanding the trust implicit in the gesture. I promise you, Emma, no one will hurt you while you're with me. That's not just a promise, it's an oath. Emma nodded once, then surprised Diana by speaking for the first time since that terrible night. Can I keep Michael's bird? Her voice was barely a whisper, rusty from disuse, but clear enough to make both women's eyes fill with tears. Of course you can, Diana managed. Michael would want you to have it. Emma picked up the wooden mockingbird and held it close to her chest. He made it for me. When I was scared. When were you scared? When Victoria got angry. When she said bad things about Daddy. When she said it was my fault he died. Emma's voice grew smaller with each revelation. Diana felt her heart break and her resolve harden simultaneously. Emma, listen to me very carefully. Your daddy's death was not your fault. Nothing that happened was your fault. And Victoria was wrong to tell you those things. Emma nodded, clutching the bird tighter. Michael said that too. He said Daddy loved me. And that love doesn't die even when people do. Michael was right, Diana said, thinking of her own son and the love that still connected them despite death. Love is stronger than anything else. Stronger than fear. Stronger than hurt. Stronger than loss. They sat in comfortable silence for a while. 3 generations of women, 1 elderly, 1 middle age, 1 just beginning, bound together by tragedy but looking toward something that might eventually resemble healing. As the afternoon sun slanted through the oak leaves, casting dancing shadows on the grass, Diana began to talk about practical things, the process of adoption, what Emma's new room might look like, the school she would attend, the doctors who would help her process her trauma. But underneath the practical discussions was something more fundamental, the beginning of a family forged not by blood but by choice, commitment, and the shared understanding that some wounds could only heal in the presence of unconditional love. That evening, Diana returned to Michael's house, which she was already beginning to think of as home rather than crime scene, and began the work of transformation. She packed away the financial documents and medical records that told the story of her son's final months. They would be needed for the trial. But they didn't need to dominate the space where Emma would hopefully learn to feel safe again. In what had been Michael's home office, she began planning Emma's room. The child would need space that felt secure but not confining, cheerful but not overwhelming, personal but not pressured. Diana had never decorated a child's room before, but she approached it with the same methodical planning she'd once applied to mission logistics. As she worked, her phone rang. The caller ID showed a number she didn't recognize, but the voice was familiar. "Colonel Hayes? This is Dr. Jennifer Walsh. I'm a child psychologist who's been working with Emma since she entered foster care." "Dr. Walsh, how can I help you?" "Actually, I'm calling to help you. Susan Clearwater told me about your plans to adopt Emma, and I wanted to offer my services as we transition her to your care." Diana felt a wave of relief. "I was going to ask about continuing her therapy. What can you tell me about her current state?" "Emma is a remarkable child," Dr. Walsh said without hesitation. "Despite everything she's been through, she's maintained a core of resilience that speaks to her fundamental strength. The selective mutism is a protective mechanism. She's not unable to speak. She's choosing not to speak when she doesn't feel safe. And today she spoke to me." "Yes," Susan told me. "That's significant progress, and it suggests she's beginning to see you as a safe person." "But Colonel, I need to be honest with you about what you're taking on." Diana settled into Michael's desk chair, preparing for difficult news. "Emma has been subjected to systematic psychological abuse for 2 years. Sarah Chen used techniques that are essentially a form of brainwashing, isolation, manipulation, threats, intermittent reinforcement of fear and affection. Emma's going to need years of therapy to undo that conditioning." "What does that look like practically?" "Nightmares, panic attacks, hypervigilance, difficulty trusting adults, possible regression in academic and social skills. She may test you repeatedly to see if you'll abandon her when she's difficult. She may withdraw completely for weeks at a time." Diana absorbed this information, thinking of the soldiers she'd known who'd suffered from PTSD. "What does she need from me?" "Consistency above all else. Predictable routines, clear boundaries, patience when she regresses, and absolute reliability. If you tell Emma something will happen, it must happen. If you make a promise, you must keep it. Her ability to trust has been shattered. Rebuilding it will require perfect consistency." "I understand. There's something else. Emma has been conditioned to believe that love is conditional, that she must earn affection through perfect behavior. She's going to need to learn that your love for her isn't dependent on her performance." Diana thought about her relationship with Michael, about the challenges of loving someone while serving in the military, about the delicate balance between discipline and affection. "Dr. Walsh, I'm not going to pretend this won't be difficult for me too. I've never been a full-time parent. My career required extended absences, rigid structure, clear hierarchies. I'm going to need guidance on how to adapt those skills to raising a traumatized child." "That's exactly what I hoped you'd say," Dr. Walsh replied warmly. "The fact that you recognize the challenges means you're already ahead of most people who take on situations like this. And Colonel, your military background isn't a disadvantage here. Emma needs structure, clear expectations, and someone who won't abandon her when things get difficult. Those are all things the military teaches very well." They talked for another 30 minutes about therapy schedules, educational considerations, and the legal process of adoption. By the time Diana hung up, she felt better prepared for the road ahead, though she harbored no illusions about how difficult that road would be. As she prepared for bed in Michael's guest room, Diana found herself thinking about the conversation with Sarah Chen. The woman was clearly a predator, a killer who had caused immeasurable pain. But she was also, herself, a victim of the same kind of systematic abuse she had inflicted on others. It didn't excuse what Sarah had done. Nothing could excuse the murder of Diana's son or the torture of an innocent child. But it added complexity to a situation Diana had initially seen in black and white terms. Evil. She had learned over 4 decades of military service. was rarely simple. It grew from seeds of pain, neglect, abuse, and trauma. Understanding its origins didn't diminish the need to fight it. But it did suggest that the fight required more than just punishment and imprisonment. It required healing, protection, and the kind of unconditional love that could break cycles of violence before they claimed new victims. Tomorrow, she would begin the formal process of adopting Emma. But tonight, she allowed herself to grieve, not just for Michael, but for the 16-year-old girl Sarah Patterson had been before Thomas Chen destroyed her capacity for healthy love. And for all the other victims, known and unknown, who had paid the price for one man's cruelty echoing through decades. The weight of truth was indeed heavy. But Diana was beginning to understand that some truths, no matter how painful, were necessary foundations for building something better. And for the first time since learning of Michael's death, she felt something that might, eventually, grow into hope. 3 months later, Diana stood in the kitchen of what was now officially her and Emma's home. Watching her newly adopted daughter carefully arrange wooden blocks on the breakfast table. Each block bore a letter. And Emma was slowly, methodically spelling out words, a morning ritual that had emerged without any prompting from adults. Michael, Emma whispered, her voice still soft but growing stronger each day. Diana continued preparing breakfast, respecting Emma's need to process her grief in her own way. The child spoke regularly now, though always quietly, and usually about practical things, what she wanted for lunch, which books she'd like to read, whether she could help with household tasks. Emotional conversations were still rare, but Dr. Walsh had assured Diana that this was normal progress for a child working through complex trauma. The sound of a car in the driveway interrupted the morning quiet. Through the window, Diana could see Agent Martinez approaching the front door, her expression serious but not alarming. "Emma," Diana said gently, "Agent Martinez is here. She's the lady who helped catch Victoria. She probably needs to talk to me about grown-up things." Emma nodded, gathering her blocks carefully. "Can I go to my room?" "Of course. If you need anything, just call me." As Emma disappeared down the hallway, Diana opened the front door to find Martinez holding a thick manila envelope. "Colonel Hayes, I hope I'm not interrupting, but I have some news about Sarah Chen that I thought you should hear in person." They settled in the living room, and Martinez opened the envelope to reveal several documents and photographs. "Sarah's been cooperating fully with the investigation," Martinez began, "in exchange for avoiding the death penalty. She's provided information that's helped us solve cold cases dating back 15 years. We've identified 9 victims across 6 states." Diana studied the photographs Martinez spread across the coffee table, men and women of various ages, all sharing the common thread of wealth, loneliness, and vulnerability that had made them targets. "There's something else," Martinez continued. "Sarah asked me to give you this." She handed Diana a sealed letter marked with Emma's name in careful handwriting. "She's written to Emma?" Diana felt a surge of protective anger. "I won't have that woman manipulating." "It's not manipulation," Martinez interrupted gently. "I've read it. It's an apology, and information about Emma's father that she thought the child should know." Diana stared at the letter, feeling its weight in her hands. What kind of information? Antonio Rodriguez wasn't just a contractor. He was also an artist, a sculptor. He made the wooden bird that Emma carries everywhere. Apparently, he made dozens of them for her, each one different, but she only had the one when Sarah took her. The revelation hit Diana unexpectedly hard. She thought of Emma's attachment to the mockingbird, the way she carried it everywhere, the comfort it seemed to provide. It wasn't just a gift from Michael, it was a connection to the father she barely remembered. "There's more," Martinez said quietly. "Sarah kept some of Antonio's belongings. Personal items, photographs, letters he'd written to Emma for her future birthdays. She's agreed to turn them over." Diana felt tears threatening. After everything Sarah had stolen, lives, money, peace of mind, she had at least preserved these connections between a father and daughter. Why would she do that? "I think," Martinez said carefully, "that somewhere underneath all the damage and dysfunction, there's still a part of her that remembers being a child who lost everything. She can't undo what she did, but maybe she can prevent Emma from losing even more." Diana nodded, understanding despite her anger. When will you have the belongings? They're in my car. Sarah also requested something else. But I want to be clear that you're under no obligation to consider it. What? She'd like to see Emma one more time. To apologize in person and to answer any questions Emma might have about her father. It would be completely controlled, the federal prison. With you present. Guards nearby. And only if Emma wants to do it. Diana's first instinct was to refuse absolutely. But as she looked toward the hallway where Emma had disappeared, she found herself considering the request more carefully. I need to think about it, she said finally. And I need to talk to Dr. Walsh and Emma. Martinez nodded. Take all the time you need. Sarah isn't going anywhere. After Martinez left, Diana sat alone in the living room, staring at the letter and thinking about the complexity of justice, forgiveness, and healing. Her military training had taught her to see conflicts in terms of clear objectives and decisive victories. But this situation resisted such simple categories. Emma appeared in the doorway, holding her wooden mockingbird. Is everything okay, Diana? Diana had encouraged Emma to call her by her first name rather than any parental title, wanting the child to have the freedom to define their relationship at her own pace. Come sit with me, sweetheart. I have some things to tell you about your daddy. For the next hour, Diana shared what Martinez had revealed about Antonio Rodriguez. She showed Emma photographs that had been recovered from Sarah's possessions, pictures of a tall, kind-faced man with carpenter's hands and an artist's eyes. Pictures of him carving wooden animals, teaching a much younger Emma to hold a chisel, laughing as she played with the creatures he'd made. Emma studied each photograph with intense concentration, occasionally touching the mockingbird in her lap. I remember this, she said quietly, pointing to a picture of herself and Antonio working together on a project. He smelled like wood and he sang songs in Spanish. Your daddy loved you very much, Diana said, watching Emma's face carefully for signs of distress. And Victoria has some more things that belong to him. Things he made for you. Emma's eyes widened. More birds? More birds. And other things too. Letters he wrote for your birthday. Pictures of your family. Emma was quiet for a long time, turning the mockingbird over and over in her small hands. Finally, she looked up at Diana with a serious expression. Did Victoria keep them because she loved Daddy too? The question was more complex than it appeared, and Diana chose her words carefully. I think Victoria kept them because she knew they were important to you. Even when she was making bad choices about other things, she understood that a little girl should have reminders of her daddy's love. Emma nodded solemnly. Can I see the other things? Of course. Agent Martinez brought them today. They spent the afternoon going through Antonio's belongings together. There were indeed more wooden animals, an entire menagerie of carefully carved creatures, each one unique and beautiful. There were photographs of Emma as a toddler, her father's construction projects, family gatherings that showed a life full of love and laughter before tragedy struck. But it was the letters that affected Emma most deeply. Antonio had written one for each year until she turned 18. Sealed envelopes marked with future dates and decorated with small drawings of birds and flowers. He knew he might not be here for all my birthdays, Emma said, her voice barely audible as she traced the drawings on the envelopes. He wanted to make sure you'd know he was thinking of you. Diana confirmed. That's what parents do, they love you even when they can't be with you. Emma looked up at her with eyes that held too much understanding for an 8-year-old. Like how you loved Michael even when you were far away working. The question hit Diana like a physical blow. In her concern for Emma's healing, she hadn't fully processed her own grief and guilt about her relationship with Michael. Yes, she said quietly, like that. Although I wish I had been here more often. I wish I had known he was sick. Emma considered this, then carefully gathered the letters into a neat stack. Michael told me you saved people for your job. He said that was important work, even if it meant you couldn't always be together. What else did Michael tell you about me? He said you were brave and strong and that you always kept your promises. He said someday I would meet you and understand why he was so proud to be your son. Diana felt tears spilling over despite her efforts to maintain composure. Michael said all that? Emma nodded seriously. He said lots of things about you, especially when Victoria was being mean. He would tell me stories about growing up with a mom who was a soldier. About how you taught him to be strong even when he was scared. For several minutes, Diana couldn't speak. The idea that Michael had been comforting Emma with stories about their relationship, that he'd been passing on the strength Diana had tried to give him despite her frequent absences, was both heartbreaking and healing. "Emma," she said when she could trust her voice again. "There's something else I need to tell you. Victoria wrote you a letter. She wants to apologize for the things she did and the way she treated you. I don't know if you want to read it or not, but the choice is yours." Emma's expression grew thoughtful. "Is she still in jail?" "Yes, and she'll stay there for the rest of her life." "Can she hurt me anymore?" "No, never again." Emma was quiet for a long time, stroking the mockingbird's carved feathers. "Can you read it to me? I don't want to touch it, but I want to know what it says." Diana opened the letter carefully and read it aloud, editing slightly to make the language more appropriate for a child. Sarah had written about her regret for the way she'd treated Emma, her acknowledgement that nothing could excuse her actions, and her hope that Emma would grow up surrounded by people who truly loved her. At the end of the letter, Sarah had included detailed memories of Antonio, his favorite songs, the stories he used to tell Emma, the way he would dance with her in the kitchen while cooking dinner. She'd also provided information about Antonio's family in Puerto Rico, relatives Emma had never known existed. "You have a grandmother and an uncle and cousins," Diana explained after finishing the letter. "They've been looking for you since your daddy died." Emma's eyes widened. "Really? They want to find me?" "They never stopped looking. Victoria told them she was taking you to live with relatives in another state, and they've been searching ever since." "Can I meet them?" "If you want to, I'll help arrange it. They can come visit, or we could go see them. Whatever feels comfortable to you." Emma nodded enthusiastically, then grew serious again. "What about Victoria? Does she want to see me?" Diana had been dreading this question. She asked if she could see you one more time, to apologize in person, but only if you want to, and only with me there to protect you. Emma considered this for a long time, unconsciously clutching the mockingbird tighter. Would she be locked up when I saw her? Yes. She'd be in jail, with guards nearby, and she couldn't touch you or hurt you in any way. And you'd be there, right beside you the whole time. Emma was quiet for several more minutes, then looked up at Diana with surprising resolve. "I think I want to see her. I want to tell her that she was wrong about Daddy, and that I'm not scared of her anymore." Diana felt a surge of pride at the child's courage, mixed with protective concern. "Are you sure? You don't have to prove anything to anyone." "I'm sure," Emma said firmly. "Michael told me that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is face the people who hurt you and show them they didn't break you." Michael was right about that too. 2 weeks later, Diana and Emma sat in a sterile visiting room at the Federal Women's Correctional Facility in Coleman, Florida. Emma had dressed carefully for the occasion, her nicest dress, the wooden mockingbird in her pocket, and a small photograph of her father that she'd chosen from the recovered belongings. When Sarah was brought in, wearing an orange jumpsuit and hand restraints, she looked smaller and more fragile than Diana remembered. Prison had aged her, stripping away the calculated beauty that had been her weapon for so many years. Sarah's eyes went immediately to Emma, and Diana saw genuine emotion cross her face, regret, sorrow, and something that might have been love. "Hello, Emma," Sarah said softly, sitting down across from them at the metal table. Emma studied her former captor with the same careful attention she brought to everything in her new life. When she spoke, her voice was steady despite its softness. "You told me lies about my daddy." Sarah nodded, her composure cracking. "I did. I told you terrible lies. And I'm sorry. You said it was my fault he died. It wasn't your fault. It was never your fault. Your daddy loved you more than anything in the world. And his death was an accident that had nothing to do with you." Emma pulled out the photograph of Antonio and placed it on the table where Sarah could see it. "I remember more things about him now. Good things. Tell me," Sarah said, leaning forward slightly. "He sang when he worked. He made pancakes shaped like animals. He read me stories and did different voices for all the characters." Emma's voice grew stronger with each memory. "He was good and kind and he never hurt anybody." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "You're right. He was all of those things. Why did you tell me he was bad? Sarah was quiet for a long time, struggling visibly with how to answer. Finally, she spoke in a voice barely above a whisper. Because someone told me lies about my daddy when I was not much older than you. Someone convinced me that love always comes with pain, that families always hurt each other, that the only way to be safe was to hurt other people first. Emma absorbed this information seriously. But that person was wrong. Yes, they were wrong, but by the time I understood that, I had already become someone who hurt people. I had forgotten how to love without causing pain. Emma reached into her pocket and pulled out the wooden mockingbird, setting it next to the photograph. Daddy made this for me. He made lots of them. But you kept them safe. I kept them because I knew they were important to you. Even when I was making terrible choices about everything else, I couldn't destroy the things your father made. Why not? Sarah was crying openly now, making no attempt to hide her tears. Because deep down, underneath all the anger and fear and damage, I remembered what it felt like to lose everything that connected me to someone I loved. I couldn't do that to you, even though I did so many other horrible things. Emma stood up and walked around the table. For a moment, Diana tensed, ready to intervene if necessary. But Emma simply reached out and touched Sarah's hand gently. I forgive you, she said simply, not because what you did was okay, but because carrying angry feelings makes me feel sick inside. Sarah broke down completely then, sobbing with a grief that seemed to come from somewhere very deep and long buried. Emma stepped back and returned to Diana's side, but her expression remained compassionate rather than frightened. I have a new family now, Emma told Sarah when the crying subsided. Diana takes care of me, and I'm going to meet my daddy's family in Puerto Rico. I'm learning to feel safe again. Sarah nodded, wiping her eyes with her sleeve. I'm glad. I'm so glad you have people who love you the right way. What will happen to you? I'll stay here for the rest of my life. But knowing that you're safe and loved, that makes it easier. Emma was quiet for a moment, then spoke with startling wisdom. Maybe you can help other people here. Maybe you can tell them about the lies that someone told you, so they don't believe the same lies. Sarah stared at Emma in amazement. You think I could do that? Michael told me that everyone can choose to do good things, even if they did bad things before. He said it's never too late to help someone. As they prepared to leave, Sarah called out to Diana. Colonel Hayes? Thank you, for bringing her, for taking care of her, for giving her the chance to become who she's meant to be. Diana nodded acknowledgement, but it was Emma who had the final word. Goodbye, Victoria. I hope you find a way to feel better inside. The drive home was quiet, both Diana and Emma processing what had just occurred. Finally, Emma spoke. I'm glad I saw her. She looked smaller than I remembered. How do you feel about that? Good. It means she was never as powerful as I thought she was. The scary things she said to me, they were just words from someone who was hurt and scared. Diana marveled at the child's insight. You're very wise, Emma. Michael taught me that understanding why someone hurts you doesn't mean you have to let them keep hurting you. You can forgive them and still stay safe. What else did Michael teach you? Emma smiled, a real smile. Bright and genuine. He taught me that families aren't just people who share blood. They're people who choose to love each other and take care of each other. Even when it's hard. Do you think we're a family? Diana asked, her heart beating faster while she waited for the answer. Emma reached over and took Diana's hand. I think we're exactly the family we both needed. 6 months later, Diana stood in the kitchen of their home, watching Emma help prepare dinner for their guests. Antonio's mother, Maria Rodriguez, was visiting from Puerto Rico along with Emma's uncle Carlos and 2 young cousins. The house was full of Spanish voices, laughter, and the sounds of a family getting to know each other again. Emma had blossomed over the months of stability and love. She spoke freely now, laughed often, and had even started school with remarkable success. The nightmares had decreased, the hypervigilance had softened, and while she still carried the wooden mockingbird everywhere, it was now a comfort rather than a necessity. Abuela Maria, Emma called out, using the Spanish word for grandmother that had come naturally to her. Can you tell Diana the story about Daddy and the pelicans? Maria Rodriguez, a woman in her 60s with kind eyes and gentle hands, smiled at her granddaughter. Mija, that's a good one. as Maria launched into a story about Antonio's childhood attempt to rescue injured pelicans. Diana felt a deep sense of contentment settle over her. This was what healing looked like, not the absence of scars, but the presence of love strong enough to hold all the broken pieces together. Her phone buzzed with a text message from Dr. Walsh. "How's our girl doing with the family visit?" Diana typed back, "Thriving. She's teaching her cousins to carve soap animals with kitchen knives. Should I be worried?" "Sounds perfectly normal for a Rodriguez," came the quick reply. Family creativity tends toward the adventurous. Later that evening, after the guests had settled into their rooms for the night, Diana and Emma sat on the back porch watching fireflies dance in the humid Florida air. "Diana?" Emma's voice was thoughtful. "Do you think Michael can see us now?" Diana considered the question seriously. "I think if love continues after death, and I believe it does, then yes. He can see us. And I think he's proud of how brave and kind you've become. I think he's proud of you too. For keeping your promise to take care of me." Diana felt the familiar tightness in her throat that came whenever Emma said something particularly profound. "What promise?" "The one you made at the hospital. When he was dying. Mrs. Patterson told me that you held his hand and promised him you'd make sure I was safe and loved." Diana stared at Emma in confusion. "Mrs. Patterson? The neighbor?" "No, the other Mrs. Patterson. The nurse who was there that night. She said Michael kept asking about me. And you promised him you'd find me and take care of me." The world seemed to tilt slightly. "Emma, honey, I was never at the hospital when Michael died. I didn't even know he was sick." Emma's brow furrowed. "But Mrs. Patterson said, she said you held his hand and told him everything would be okay. That you'd make sure I had a family." A chill ran down Diana's spine as pieces began falling into place. "Emma, what did this Mrs. Patterson look like?" "She was old, with white hair and soft hands. She smelled like flowers and she cried when she talked about Michael." Diana's mind raced back to her first day in Naples, to the elderly woman who had approached her from across the street. Margaret Patterson, who had seemed to know so much about Michael's final days, who had been the one to tell her about Emma's existence. "Emma, I need to make a phone call." 20 minutes later, Diana hung up the phone with a mixture of amazement and confusion. According to Officer Rodriguez, there had indeed been a nurse named Patterson who had been present during Michael's final hours. But Margaret Patterson, the neighbor, was not related to any hospital staff. She was simply a kind woman who had been looking after Michael's house and had somehow known exactly what Diana needed to hear that first day. When Diana shared this information with Emma, the child smiled with the kind of understanding that seemed to come naturally to her now. "Maybe some angels look like nurses, and some look like neighbors," Emma said simply. "Maybe Michael asked them to make sure we found each other." Diana found herself unable to argue with that logic. In a story filled with darkness and pain, with predators and victims and the long shadows cast by trauma, perhaps there was room for the kind of inexplicable grace that brought a grieving mother and a traumatized child together at exactly the moment they both needed saving. "You know what I think?" Diana said, pulling Emma closer on the porch swing. "What?" "I think we saved each other." Emma nodded solemnly, then smiled. "I think you're right." As they sat together in the gathering darkness, surrounded by the sounds of family settling in for the night and the promise of more healing to come, Diana realized that the weight of truth had indeed been heavy, but shared between two people committed to building something beautiful from the ashes of loss. Even the heaviest truths could become the foundation for hope. The mockingbird in Emma's pocket, carved by a father's loving hands, carried through trauma by a child's resilience, and preserved by the complicated mercy of someone who had forgotten how to love properly, rested quiet and safe. Like its owner, it had survived the darkness and found its way home. And in the distance, fireflies continued their ancient dance, tiny lights piercing the night with the persistent promise that even in the deepest darkness, beauty endures.